People misunderstand the nature of wealth. They think wealth is something external, something to be accumulated quickly, a trophy to show off at social gatherings or a way to impress their neighbors. In truth, wealth is simply deferred gratification, made tangible. It is the ability to live comfortably without dependence on chance or circumstance, the capacity to make decisions free from the tyranny of urgent bills or fleeting trends. Yet most people chase the flashy, the immediate, and the superficial. They purchase expensive cars, gadgets, and experiences on credit, believing that happiness can be bought, and they rarely pause to understand that every dollar spent foolishly is a brick removed from the foundation of long-term security. I've met countless people who earn good salaries but are no closer to financial independence than someone making half their income. Why? Because they never learned the quiet, unglamorous discipline of saving, investing, and letting time do its work. They confuse activity with progress, thinking that busy work and consumption are proof of success. Real wealth, the kind that lasts generations, is built silently, patiently, and without fanfare, and those who chase immediate gratification will never see it. The irony is bitter. Those who seem to struggle the most often have the clearest path to freedom, yet they are blinded by the noise of comparison and the pull of societal pressures. The second reason is deeply psychological. Humans are wired to favor the present over the future. Our brains are excellent at solving immediate problems, but terrible at comprehending the abstract and distant. This bias toward the present, known to psychologists as temporal discounting, causes people to spend impulsively, to overvalue immediate pleasures, and to underestimate the power of compounding over decades. Warren and I have seen time and again how Tadetsad, his simple mental flaw, can destroy fortunes before they are even born. Someone may make $1 million in a single year, yet within a few short years, without discipline or understanding, that fortune can vanish. It is not because they were unlucky, but because they were governed by the moment, not by principles. They make decisions based on emotion rather than reason, buying things to feel secure, to impress, or to distract themselves from uncertainty, never realizing that patience, consistency, and the quiet accumulation of assets far outweigh flashy gains or risky bets. Financial literacy, therefore, is not enough. It is the mastery of your own mind that matters. Understanding markets, spreadsheets, or investment vehicles is pointless if your own psychology undermines every calculated step. The people who remain broke are those who cannot control their impulses, who fail to think in decades rather than days, and who underestimate the almost magical effect of compounding applied patiently over time. The third reason, and perhaps the most insidious, is that most people are trapped by a flawed education system and a culture that glorifies consumption over creation. From a young age, we are taught to memorize facts, follow rules, and obey authority, but we are rarely taught how money works, how to think critically about risk and reward, or how to create value in ways that endure. Schools prepare students to be employees, not owners. They teach us to seek security in a paycheck rather than freedom in financial independence. And society compounds this problem by feeding illusions. Advertisements, social media, and peer pressure convince us that happiness is bought, that status is earned through display, and that wealth is something external rather than a reflection of skillful living. Most people never question these assumptions. They follow the script laid out for them, step into careers dictated by others, and spend their lives trading time for money in ways that rarely build long-term security. Meanwhile, those who break free, those who question, who think for themselves, who study patterns of wealth across generations, understand that financial success is less about luck and more about systems, habits, and the application of timeless principles. Charlie and I have always said that the world is full of opportunities, but most people miss them, not because opportunities are scarce, but because their vision is clouded by conformity, distraction, and fear. The unfortunate truth is that education without wisdom is a trap. Knowledge without judgment is dangerous, and ambition without patience is often self-defeating. Another reason people remain broke forever is their relationship with risk, which is both misunderstood and mishandled. People are either too reckless or too timid, seldom finding the balance that leads to true wealth. Some gamble with money they cannot afford to lose, chasing the illusion of overnight success, while others never invest at all, fearing loss and clinging to cash as if it were freedom itself. Neither approach works because both are governed by emotion rather than reason. The patient investor understands that risk is not a four-letter word to be feared, but a tool to be understood and respected. Money grows when it is put to work intelligently, when opportunities are evaluated with both caution and insight, and when decisions are informed by rational judgment rather than fleeting moods. Yet too many people fail to educate themselves about risk, and instead listen to the crowd, follow the headlines, or succumb to the seductive promise of easy riches. They never build real wealth because they never understand the simple rule that Charlie and I have followed for decades. Never lose money, and always learn to recognize the difference between chance and skill. Most people fail because they treat investing like gambling, emotions like strategy, and luck like planning. This fundamental misalignment between perception and reality ensures that the cycle of financial struggle continues, year after year, decade after decade. Another critical reason so many people stay broke is their inability to think in terms of systems rather than events. Most individuals approach money as a series of transactions rather than a long-term accumulation of decisions, a collection of habits, and an application of principles. They focus on making a big score, a single investment or promotion that will change their life, instead of understanding that wealth is the inevitable result of consistent, intelligent action over decades. Charlie often says that patience is the most underrated skill in life, and I would echo that wholeheartedly. Compounding, whether in investments, knowledge, or relationships, works slowly but relentlessly. People fail to see this. They want immediate gratification, immediate validation, immediate results, and when these results do not come, they give up, believing that they are incapable, unlucky, or destined for mediocrity. They fail to realize that real success is not a single event, but the product of a system that protects against mistakes, leverages opportunities, and allows small gains to accumulate into substantial advantages. The truth is, financial freedom is less about brilliant strokes and more about avoiding stupidity, staying rational, and letting time work in your favor. Most people never create these systems because it requires discipline, foresight, and the humility to recognize that the best moves often look boring, invisible, or insignificant in the moment. Equally important, people remain poor because they misunderstand. In the nature of value, they chase money without understanding how to create it. They look for shortcuts, for jobs, for investments that promise quick returns, while ignoring the fundamental principle that wealth comes from delivering value, that others are willing to pay for consistently. Charlie and I have always emphasized that buying or investing is not about emotion or luck. It is about understanding intrinsic value, patience, and judgment. Yet the majority of people operate in reverse. They measure success by what they earn, not what they contribute, by status symbols rather than by the actual wealth they create. This mindset is destructive because it creates a feedback loop of frustration, impulsive spending, and misplaced priorities. People work tirelessly for a paycheck, but they never learn how to make money work for them. They trade their hours for dollars, their energy for fleeting satisfaction, and they never pause to consider that the greatest fortunes are built not by working harder, but by thinking smarter, by spotting patterns, by making rational decisions, and by using resources, networks, and capital as tools to multiply effort over time. Finally, one of the least spoken truths about why people remain broke forever is fear. Fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of stepping off the beaten path. Fear is the silent partner in financial stagnation. It convinces people to settle for security, even when security is a cage. It persuades them to follow the herd, to mimic behaviors without understanding them, and to avoid risks that could, if calculated and understood, change their lives. Fear keeps people in jobs they hate, investments they don't understand, and spending patterns that undermine their future. Overcoming this fear is not easy. It requires courage, insight, and the willingness to accept responsibility for every decision, but it is essential. The truth is, those who break free, those who escape the 90%, do so because they confront fear with knowledge, patience, and rational judgment. They see risk as opportunity, failure as learning, and time as the greatest ally they could ever have. The combination of foresight, discipline, and courage separates those who accumulate wealth from those who remain trapped in mediocrity. It is a harsh truth, but also a liberating one. Your financial fate is not predestined. It is largely a reflection of your mindset, your habits, and your willingness to act rationally in a world dominated by emotion. Another dimension that keeps people trapped in financial struggle is the subtle yet pervasive influence of envy and comparison. Humans have an innate tendency to measure themselves against others, to define success not by their own progress, but by what their neighbors, friends, or colleagues possess. This comparison is toxic because it encourages spending beyond means, chasing status symbols, and prioritizing appearances over substance. People see someone else's house, car, or lifestyle, and convince themselves that they are falling behind, forgetting that wealth is not a contest to be won in public, but a private journey of accumulation and prudence. Charlie and I have often observed that true financial security requires a level of detachment from these societal pressures. It requires a focus on intrinsic goals rather than extrinsic validation. Yet the majority never achieve this because they are constantly distracted by what others have, rather than what they themselves could create. They take on debt to keep up, they make impulsive decisions to impress, and they measure their self-worth by consumption rather than contribution. This habit is lethal to wealth creation. Over time, it erodes savings, magnifies mistakes, and keeps people locked in a cycle of working harder to finance lifestyles they cannot truly afford. Financial independence demands the courage to live below your means, to value substance over style, and to recognize that the measure of wealth is freedom, not applause. Closely related is the tendency of most people to neglect lifelong learning and self-improvement. Education is not a one-time event. It is a lifelong pursuit. Yet many assume that earning a degree or securing a job is the pinnacle of achievement after which their minds can rest. This is a grave error. Knowledge, judgment, and wisdom compound just like money, but they require deliberate effort, curiosity, and humility. The world is constantly evolving. New industries emerge, markets shift, technologies disrupt, and human behavior adapts. Those who stop learning, who rely solely on outdated skills or conventional wisdom, are destined to fall behind. Meanwhile, those who study patterns, who read widely, who analyze mistakes and successes alike, develop mental models that allow them to see opportunities before others and avoid pitfalls that trap the majority. Wealth is not just the accumulation of dollars, it is the accumulation of judgment, insight, and experience applied consistently over time. The people who stay broke are often those who stop growing intellectually, who confuse experience with understanding, and who fail to cultivate the mental tools necessary to navigate the complexities of life and money. Finally, one of the most overlooked reasons 90% of people remain broke is their failure to anticipate the long-term consequences of small decisions. Life is not determined by grand gestures alone. It is shaped by the tiny, repeated choices that accumulate day after day, year after year. Skipping savings, indulging in unnecessary luxuries, neglecting investments, and avoiding tough conversations about money might seem inconsequential in isolation, but their impact compounds exponentially over decades. Charlie and I have always emphasized the importance of avoiding stupid mistakes more than chasing brilliance, because avoiding loss is easier and more powerful than trying to get lucky. The failure to internalize this principle is what keeps so many people in a perpetual state of financial fragility. They make minor errors repeatedly, never recognizing the slow erosion of their wealth, and by the time they realize the problem, it is often too late to recover fully. Wealth, like life itself, favors the patient, the prudent, and the disciplined. It rewards those who understand cause and effect, who anticipate the ripple effects of small decisions, and who treat time as a partner rather than an enemy. Another reason so many people remain trapped in financial mediocrity is their misunderstanding of opportunity and their unwillingness to embrace it when it arrives. Life is filled with chances that can radically alter your financial trajectory, but most people fail to recognize them because they are either too cautious or too distracted. Opportunities rarely present themselves as perfect, risk-free, or convenient. They usually arrive disguised as hard work, careful study, or uncomfortable challenges. Charlie and I have often observed that fortune favors the rational and prepared mind. Those who succeed are not necessarily the smartest, the luckiest, or the boldest. They are the ones who can identify patterns, assess risks with clarity, and act decisively when the world is offering them a doorway. The majority, however, hesitate. They wait for perfect timing, for guaranteed outcomes, for reassurance from others, and in doing so, they let life pass by. Wealth is, in many ways, the reward of discernment, the ability to separate what is meaningful from what is trivial, what is opportunity from distraction, and what is risk worth taking from risk that is merely fear in disguise. The failure to act, to step beyond comfort, and to harness opportunity with rational judgment is a silent killer of financial growth, keeping millions chained to mediocrity, while the prepared few accumulate compounding advantages. As equally destructive is the lack of a long-term perspective. Most people live in a world dominated by immediacy, focusing on quarterly gains, instant gratification, and short-term success. Yet true wealth is always a product of decades, not days. Charlie often emphasizes that we are trying to get rich slowly, through patience and careful, rational decision-making rather than chasing excitement or volatility. Those who remain broke are rarely victims of circumstance. They are victims of impatience. They overtrade, overspend, and overreact to fleeting trends, thinking that wealth is built through bold maneuvers rather than consistent prudence. Meanwhile, those who embrace the slow, steady accumulation of knowledge, relationships, and financial assets develop compounding advantages that eventually become nearly unstoppable. Time is the single most powerful tool in wealth creation, yet most people treat it as irrelevant. They fail to understand that the effects of their daily decisions, saving a small portion of income, investing wisely, learning continuously, avoiding foolish debt, multiply silently, invisibly, and inexorably. By the time they realize the value of time, much of the compounding advantage has already been lost, and the gulf between them and the disciplined few has grown too wide to close easily. Another crucial factor is the inability to separate emotion from judgment. People allow fear, greed, pride, and envy to dictate financial choices instead of reason, evidence, and rational calculation. Markets, investments, and personal finances are profoundly influenced by human behavior, yet most people behave as if they are machines, expecting predictable outcomes without controlling their impulses. Charlie and I have observed that those who succeed in wealth creation are not immune to emotion, but they recognize it, account for it, and often act contrary to it when logic demands. Most people, however, surrender to their feelings, buying when the crowd is euphoric, selling when panic strikes, and letting personal biases override objective analysis. This failure to master the internal landscape of decision-making ensures repeated mistakes, squandered opportunities, and a life constrained by financial frustration. In truth, emotional discipline is the invisible lever behind most fortunes. Without it, intelligence and hard work alone cannot produce lasting wealth. Finally, we arrive at the culmination of why 90% of people remain broke, and it is perhaps the most profound reason of all, a failure to take full responsibility for their own lives. Most people look outward for explanations, blaming the economy, their upbringing, bad luck, or even the government for their financial struggles, when the real determinant is almost always internal. Charlie and I have always believed that the most important skill in life is the ability to think independently and to act deliberately, fully owning the consequences of every choice. Those who remain broke forever are often trapped in a mindset of victimhood. They wait for external circumstances to change, for opportunities to be handed to them, or for others to rescue them from their financial difficulties. Meanwhile, the few who escape the trap recognize a simple truth. Life rewards responsibility. The person who studies carefully, saves consistently, invests prudently, cultivates patience, and confronts fear builds compounding advantages that are almost impossible to take away. They do not wait for fortune, they create it. They understand that while chance may influence short-term outcomes, rational, disciplined, and responsible behavior determines long-term destiny. Wealth, freedom, and security are therefore not matters of luck. They are matters of choice, habit, and the relentless ace. Application of wisdom over decades. Moreover, this lesson ties all the previous points together: the mismanagement of money, the misunderstanding of value, the poor handling of risk, the susceptibility to envy and fear, the neglect of opportunity, and the failure to embrace long-term thinking all stem from a refusal to fully take ownership of one's life. People who remain broke do so because they abdicate responsibility, leaving the most important decisions of their lives to chance, habit, or the influence of others. The few who rise above do so because they embrace accountability with humility and courage. They understand that life is not a series of random events, but a complex system in which every decision carries weight, every habit compounds, and every day offers a choice between mediocrity and excellence. In the end, escaping the 90% trap is less about learning new tricks or chasing trends, and more about cultivating a mindset rooted in patience, rationality, responsibility, and long-term vision. It is about seeing life as it truly is, unflinchingly, and acting with wisdom that is often quiet, invisible, and slow, but ultimately unstoppable in its results. If one can internalize this, then financial stagnation is no longer inevitable. It becomes a choice, and a choice that can be reversed, corrected, and mastered over time. Respected friends, as we draw this conversation to a close, let me leave you with the unvarnished truth. Escaping the cycle that keeps 90% of people broke is entirely within your power, but it demands a clarity of thought, a mastery of emotion, and a commitment to principles that most are too distracted, impatient, or fearful to adopt. Wealth is not about luck, it is not about genius, and it is certainly not about the flashing symbols of status that society so often celebrates. It is about thinking clearly, acting rationally, and cultivating habits that allow knowledge, judgment, and resources to compound quietly over years and decades. It is about embracing delayed gratification, understanding value, managing risk, and taking full responsibility for every financial decision you make. The few who achieve financial freedom do so not because they are extraordinary, but because they apply ordinary principles with extraordinary consistency, resisting the temptations, distractions, and irrational impulses that ensnare the majority. If you internalize these lessons, if you train your mind to see the long term, if you act with patience, courage, and discipline, then you place yourself in the minority that builds lasting wealth, that masters life's complexities, and that achieves true freedom. Remember, time is your ally, rationality is your compass, and responsibility is your foundation. Those who understand this can transcend circumstance, outlast distraction, and ultimately craft a life not dictated by fear or chance, but by wisdom, foresight, and the compounding power of deliberate action. In the end, the choice is yours. Remain part of the 90%, or step deliberately onto the path that leads to freedom, security, and enduring prosperity. The difference is not luck, it is mindset, and it is entirely within your control.